Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Today, as we gather at this memorial to victims of communism, we pray that we may be ever mindful of the rich and noble dignity that you give to each of your sons and daughters. Amen.
It's now my honor to introduce the Honorable Dana Rohrabacher, Republican Congressman from the 46th District of California. Congressman Rohrabacher served as one of the principal speechwriters for President Ronald Reagan, and for the past 19 years has served in the U.S. Congress. He sits on the International Relations Committee and was the principal author of the legislation authorizing the construction of the Victims of Communism Memorial. Please welcome the Honorable Dana Rohrabacher.
Thank you very much. All right. This is an appropriate time to be dedicating this memorial. It was 20 years ago this week that President Ronald Reagan gave his now famous Berlin Wall speech. A columnist in the New York Times recently noted that the foreign policy gurus of that era, as compared to the American people in general, have not acknowledged the significance of that forceful challenge by President Reagan to Communist Party boss Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down this wall. The columnist noted that even George Shultz did not mention this speech in his lengthy memoirs about his years as President Reagan's Secretary of State. Well, let me take this opportunity to set the record straight. George Shultz and the other foreign policy elite that was being mentioned, including Colin Powell, adamantly opposed that speech and did everything they could to stop it. They did everything they could to pressure Ronald Reagan not to take such a tough public stand against the wall. They insisted this would reignite ill will and be taken as an insult to Gorbachev. Well, they were wrong, and President Reagan, with his moral clarity and a commitment to confronting evil rather than ignoring it for diplomatic or political reasons, carried the day. Instead of antagonizing the Kremlin, of course, the speech convinced the Kremlin leadership that they had to bring down the wall, and with it, communism crumbled. One only wonders what would have happened had the foreign policy elite had their way and that we didn't have such a strong and forceful president as President Ronald Reagan. Today we commemorate the tens of millions of victims of communism, that evil ideology that was a monstrous threat to the people of this planet for 7 decades. We remember them, and we are grateful to those who put themselves in harm's way and often gave their lives to protect the free people of the world, to prevent us from becoming victims of communism. We are also grateful for the courage and bold leadership of those like Ronald Reagan, who stood tall when it counted so that this murderous, tyrannical scourge could be defeated and relegated to the dustbin of history. Americans, and yes, American leaders, played the pivotal role in that historic battle, which of course is fitting. We Americans represent every race, every religion, every ethnic group that's found on this planet. So it comes to us to take the stand, to lead the way in those battles that determine the fate of mankind. We stopped and defeated Japanese militarism and Nazism. During the Cold War, sometimes suffering slings and arrows from front and back, America persevered and freedom prevailed over Soviet communism. The victimization sanctioned by that evil ideology was stopped in what was the Soviet Union and its empire. Yes, challenges remain in how we will deal with the remnants of Leninist tyranny in those countries like China, Cuba, Laos, and Vietnam. Nevertheless, there is a new scourge threatening the free people of this world that has our attention, and that is the scourge in the form and the threat in the form of radical terror, radical Islam. Americans will lead the way in this fight, this historic fight as well. Defeating this historic challenge is on our shoulders. This generation, we don't have Ronald Reagan with us anymore. Well, we will honor the victims of communism with our bravery to see that tyranny, any tyranny, that would destroy the longing for freedom in the human heart never victimizes the people of this world again. It is my honor to have been the author of the bill that authorized this with a very, very strong support of Chairman Tom Lantos to make sure that we had this memorial to remember the victims of communism and to give us strength to do what's right.
Thank you very much, Congressman Rohrabacher, for those remarks, and thank you even more for all you did to make this memorial possible. It is now my privilege to introduce the keynote speaker, the Honorable Tom Lantos. Congressman Lantos has served as a member of the United States Congress since January 3rd, 1981, and is the only Holocaust survivor ever to serve in Congress. Representative Lantos was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1928. Nazi Germany invaded and occupied his country when Congressman Lantos was 16 years old, and he became a member of the anti-Nazi underground. He was eventually saved by Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg, who later died in Soviet captivity. A portrait of Wallenberg hangs behind Mr. Lantos' desk in his congressional office. After the war, Congressman Lantos continued battling for freedom as a member of the anti-communist student movement. He was able to leave Hungary in 1947 to study in the United States, where he earned a BA and MA in economics from the University of Washington in Seattle, and later a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. In 1983, Mr. Lantos was the founder of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, and he continues to serve as its co-chairman. The congressman has also been a strong supporter of the Victims of Communism Memorial. Please welcome Congressman Tom Lantos.
We are an ahistorical society, and it's absolutely mandatory that we remember the period of communism which represented an existential threat to the civilized world. I salute and honor all those who played a role in bringing about this monument, so significant to the upcoming generation, which barely knows that not too many years ago, the communists felt that they were the wave of the future, that the future belonged to them, and they took a handful of powerful political leaders in this country and elsewhere, Republicans and Democrats, and individuals of all political persuasions, to recognize the difference between free and open and democratic societies and communist tyranny. Since we are an ahistorical society, it is probably up to me, who spent most of his life in the 20th century, to point out that communism was not the only monstrous phenomenon determined to destroy free and open societies. It was my privilege to fight against Nazism, and it was my privilege to fight against communism, and it is now my privilege to fight against Islamic terrorism determined to take us back 13 centuries. It was only a few months ago that I stood in Cleveland in front of a group of Hungarian Americans, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. There they are. Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts commemorating the 50th anniversary of the 1956 uprising. The 1956 uprising was the quintessential rise of the human spirit against communist tyranny. It had no chance of succeeding, people said. My view of the '56 uprising is not that it was a failure, it was a delayed victory. President Bush, who will be here in a few minutes, went to Budapest in November to commemorate that magnificent uprising, which is so symbolic of the human spirit, which is unwilling to live under tyrannies in North Korea, in Iran, in Afghanistan under the Taliban, in Cuba, and in all these other places where monsters take control of government and are denying religious, political, human freedom to all their people. There is not the slightest doubt in my mind that long after the current tyrannies, exemplified by Ahmadinejad in Iran, will have been swept away by the forces of history, the United States of America, the city on a hill, the United States of America, of which not only I am proud to be a citizen, but every single individual who tasted communism from Albania to Estonia knows that without the United States of America, this existential struggle for human freedom and human liberty would have been lost. I am so glad that the era of Jacques Chirac and Chancellor Schroeder in Germany is now gone. I had occasion to point out to my German friends what we did for them in 2 generations. We saved them from Hitler. We gave them the Marshall Plan. We had a little sideshow called the Berlin Airlift, 253,000 flights to keep the people of Berlin fed and warm. And for 2 generations, we protected them from the Soviet Union. And when we asked Schroeder to stand with us, he told us where to go. I referred to him as a political prostitute, now that he's taking big checks from Putin. But the sex workers in my district objected, so I will no longer use that phrase. I told my French friends that Jacques Chirac should go down to the Normandy beaches. He should see those endless rows of snow-white marble crosses and stars of David representing young Americans who gave their lives for the freedom of France under Angela Merkel in Germany and Sarkozy in Hungary, a Hungarian in France. Relations with Germany and France will take a very positive turn. We will rebuild the Atlantic Alliance. And just as today, NATO has accepted its responsibility of fighting the monstrous evil of the Taliban in Afghanistan, NATO will be revitalized in the coming years as the military arm of the civilized world to see to it that no Nazism, no communism, no Ahmadinejanism will prevail on this planet. One of my younger grandchildren asked me yesterday, why was the President of the United States so well received in Albania? He has been accustomed to having demonstrations against the President of the United States, whoever he may be. So I explained to him that his grandmother and I opened Albania after 50 years of no contact, and it was my privilege to bring back a letter from the Albanian president to our president, asking for the re-establishment of diplomatic relations. It is my privilege to continue working with these countries, from North Korea to Libya to hopefully Iran, to bring about a recognition that the wave of the future is not godless communism. It is not distorted Islamic fascism, but it is free and open and democratic societies. God bless us all.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Thank you, sir.
Uh, 20 years ago, President Reagan stood before the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Well, cynics scoffed at President Reagan's words, but 2 years later, the Berlin Wall came tumbling down, and soon after that, the evil empire was no more. A little over 2 years ago, standing on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, President Bush declared, "The best hope for peace in our world is the expansion of freedom in our world." Once again, the naysayers scoffed, but the forces of freedom and democracy are in motion around the world, demonstrating that, in the President's words, freedom is the permanent hope of mankind. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Well done. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Please be seated. Dr. Edwards, thanks for your kind words. Congressman Lantos, no better friend of freedom, by the way. Congressman Rohrbacher, the same. Members of the Czech and Hungarian parliaments, ambassadors, distinguished guests, and more importantly, the survivors of communist oppression, I'm honored to join you on this historic day. And here in the company of men and women who resisted evil and helped bring down an empire, I proudly accept the Victims of Communism Memorial on behalf of the American people. The 20th century will be remembered as the deadliest century in human history. And the record of this brutal era is commemorated in memorials across this city. Yet until now, our nation's capital had no monument to the victims of imperial communism, an ideology that took the lives of an estimated 100 million innocent men, women, and children. So it's fitting that we gather to remember those who perished at communism's hands and dedicate this memorial that will enshrine their suffering and sacrifice in the conscience of the world. Building this memorial took more than a decade of effort, and its presence in our capital is a testament to the passion and determination of two distinguished Americans, Lev Dobryansky, whose daughter Paula is here, Give your dad our best. And Dr. Lee Edwards. They faced setbacks and challenges along the way, yet they never gave up. Because in their hearts they heard the voices of the fallen crying out, "Remember us." These voices cry out to all, and they're legion. The sheer numbers of those killed in communism's name are staggering, so large that a precise count is impossible. According to the best scholarly estimate, communism took the lives of tens of millions of people in China and the Soviet Union, and millions more in North Korea, Cambodia, Africa, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Eastern Europe, and other parts of the globe. Behind these numbers are human stories of individuals with families and dreams whose lives were cut short by men in pursuit of totalitarian power. Some of communism's victims are well known. They include a Swedish diplomat named Raoul Wallenberg, who saved 100,000 Jews from the Nazis, only to be arrested on Stalin's orders and sent to Moscow's Lubyanka prison, where he disappeared without a trace. They include a Polish priest named Father Papiejeszko, who made his Warsaw church a sanctuary for the Solidarity Underground and was kidnapped and beaten and drowned in the Vishula by the secret police. The sacrifices of these individuals haunt history, and behind them are millions more who were killed in anonymity by communism's brutal hand. They include innocent Ukrainians starved to death in Stalin's Great Famine, or Russians killed in Stalin's purges, Lithuanians and Latvians and Estonians loaded onto cattle cars and deported to Arctic death camps of Soviet communism. They include Chinese killed in the Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution, Cambodians slain in Pol Pot's killing fields, East Germans shot attempting to scale the Berlin Wall in order to make it to freedom, Poles massacred in the Cotton Forest, and Ethiopians slaughtered in the Red Terror, Mosquito Indians murdered by Nicaragua's Sandinista dictatorship, and Cuban balseros who drowned escaping tyranny. We'll never know the names of all who perished. But at this sacred place, communism's unknown victims will be consecrated to history and remembered forever. We dedicate this memorial because we have an obligation to those who died, to acknowledge their lives and honor their memory. The Czech writer Milan Kundera once described the struggle against communism as the struggle of memory against forgetting. Communist regimes did more than take their victims' lives. They sought to steal their humanity and erase their memory. With this memorial, we restore their humanity and we reclaim their memory. With this memorial, we say of communism's innocent and anonymous victims, these men and women lived, and they shall not be forgotten. We dedicate this memorial because we have an obligation to future generations to record the crimes of the 20th century and ensure they're never repeated. In this hallowed place, we recall the great lessons of the Cold War, that freedom is precious and cannot be taken for granted, that evil is real and must be confronted, and that given the chance, men commanded by harsh and hateful ideologies will commit unspeakable crimes and take the lives of millions. It's important that we recall these lessons because the evil and hatred that inspired the death of tens of millions of people in the 20th century is still at work in the world. We saw its face on September the 11th, 2001. Like the communists, the terrorists and radicals who attacked our nation are followers of a murderous ideology that despises freedom, crushes all dissent, has expansionist ambitions, and pursues totalitarian aims. Like the communists, our new enemies believe the innocent can be murdered to serve a radical vision. Like the communists, our new enemies are dismissive of free peoples, claiming that those of us who live in liberty are weak and lack the resolve to defend our free way of life. And like the communists, the followers of violent Islamic radicalism are doomed to fail. By remaining steadfast in freedom's cause, we will ensure that a future American president does not have to stand at a place like this and dedicate a memorial to the millions killed by the radicals and extremists of the 21st century. We can have confidence in the power of freedom because we've seen freedom overcome tyranny and terror before. Dr. Edwards said, President Reagan went to Berlin. He was clear in his statement. He said, tear down the wall, and 2 years later the wall fell. And millions across Central and Eastern Europe were liberated from unspeakable oppression. It's appropriate that on the anniversary of that speech that we dedicate a monument that reflects our confidence in freedom's power. The men and women who designed this memorial could have chosen an image of repression for this space. A replica of the wall that once divided Berlin, or the frozen barracks of the Gulag, or a killing field littered with skulls. Instead, they chose an image of hope. A woman holding a lamp of liberty. She reminds us of the victims of communism and also of the power that overcame communism. Like our Statue of Liberty, she reminds us that the flame for freedom burns in every human heart, and that it is a light that cannot be extinguished by the brutality of terrorists or tyrants. And she reminds us that when an ideology kills tens of millions of people and still ends up being vanquished, it is contending with a power greater than death. She reminds us that freedom is the gift of our Creator. Freedom is the birthright of all humanity. And in the end, freedom will prevail. I thank each of you who made this memorial possible for your service in freedom's cause. I thank you for your devotion to the memory of those who lost their lives to communist terror. May the victims of communism rest in peace. May those who continue to suffer under communism find their freedom. And may the God who gave us liberty bless this great memorial and all who come to visit her. God bless.